It's 6:59.
Okay, let's let in right at 7 and we'll start as soon as we let them in. How
Okay,
about
no
that?
problem.
Go ahead, let
It
them in.
works.
Let's go ahead. Let's get going.
You're so funny. Okay, hold on. Okay, emitting now.
So, welcome, welcome, welcome. So, greetings on behalf of the Seasoned Sisters Speak series. So, we are looking forward to our casual conversation with our panel members this evening, featuring our Black Sisters in Blue. We ask that you remain on mute, remain on mute, remain on mute, or unfortunately, we will have to help you remain on mute. We have a tech team working behind the scenes, Deanna and Jade, who will help you to remain on mute if necessary. Please, 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 by all means, use the chat room for discussions if you have questions, and we will make every effort to try to get to them at the end of the panel, right? May not be able to, but we're going to try because we have this strategized out so we answer as many questions as we can. We're going to get started. I'm going to go ahead and introduce the panel members to you. So first, let me recognize and introduce to you Chief Vera Bumpers. Chief Bumpers is a recognized thought leader and sought out speaker on topics about women and minorities in law enforcement. In her position, she addresses innate bias, peer accountability, and law enforcement responsibilities. She has received several recognitions for her achievement, including being named one of Houston's 2018 most influential women and one of the 2016 top Black professionals and entrepreneurs in Houston. Now, let me go back and tell you who Chief Bumpers is. Chief Vera Bumpers leads the Houston Metro Transit Authority Police Department, the largest transit law enforcement agency in Texas. She was appointed to this role in November 2014, serving as the first woman chief of police at Metro. She leads more than 200 special purpose peace officers and nearly 100 civilian employees. Chief Bumpers garnered many firsts, such as first woman in the Metro Police Department, as well as first African-American in the Metro Police Department, first to attain the rank position as sergeant, lieutenant, captain, and assistant chief. So you all, as you can imagine, she has earned her battle scars and she has really risen up through the ranks. Chief Bumpers has a bachelor's degree from Texas State University in criminal justice, and is always the case, we always have to feel like we go back and get more. She has a master's of science and education from Prairie View A&M, right? Chief Bumpers is a member of the National Organization of Black Law Enforcement Executives, NOBLE, where she served as one of our national presidents, our 42nd national president. Chief Bumpers has won many, many awards. I won't name them all for you. And she is a very proud member of Delta Sigma Theta sorority. Chief Bumpers, you want to wave so everyone can see who you are? Thank you, sis. I'll go to our next panel member, Chief Gina Hawkins is the chief for the city of Fayetteville, North Carolina Police Department, and has over 31 years of law enforcement experience. Chief Hawkins holds a Bachelor of Science in Criminal Justice from Georgia State University, and as always the case, goes back and gets more education. She holds a Master's of Science in Management degree from Johns Hopkins University. She started her career, in 1988 with the City of Atlanta Police Department. Chief Bumpers retired as a an assistant zone commander from the Atlanta Police Department in 2006. In 2013, Chief Hawkins joined the Clayton County Police Department as a deputy chief of police. And now she is the chief. Chief Hawkins is a graduate of the FBI Association's Academy and was chosen to be a delegate in the prestigious 23rd Georgia International Law Enforcement Exchange, where she traveled to Israel with other law enforcement executives to study and evaluate the Israel Police Department. In January 2020, Chief Hawkins was sworn in by the Attorney General of the United States to serve as a commissioner on the Presidential Commission of Law Enforcement and the Administration of Justice. Chief Hawkins also has numerous awards, and she is a proud member of the National Organization of Black Law Enforcement Executive, serving as the treasurer. Chief Hawkins, you want to give everybody a wave? Thank you, ma'am. Our last panel member is Assistant Chief Judith R. Harris. Chief Harris joined the New York City Police Department in 1997 and began her career in patrol. She was promoted to sergeant in 2002, lieutenant in 2006, captain in 2013, deputy inspector in 2015, inspector 2017, deputy chief 2018, and assistant chief 2020. Y'all know where that's going, right? It doesn't stop here. We got plans for her. Prior to being assigned as a commanding officer, Patrol Bureau, Brooklyn North, she was assigned as the commanding officer of the Special Victims Division. She has also commanded the 109 and the 112th precincts and served as the executive officer of the Detective Bureau and the 115th precinct. Assistant Chief Harris has brought a high level of knowledge, enthusiasm, and empathy to Patrol Bureau Brooklyn North. And as we say, her staff loves her. Assistant Chief Harris is the fourth African-American woman in NYPD history to ascend to the rank of Assistant Chief, and the first woman in the New York Police Department's history to be assigned as commanding officer of Patrol Bureau Brooklyn North. She has a Master's of Arts degree in criminal justice and a Bachelor's of Science degree in business administration. She's also a graduate of the Police Executive Research Forum, Senior Management Institute for Police. Assistant Chief Harris is a life member of the National Organization of Black Law Enforcement Executive. She's currently serving as a recording secretary, and she is a very, very proud member of Sigma Gamma Rho Sorority Incorporated. Now, let me introduce Chief Harris. Say hello to everybody. All right. Let me introduce our moderator to you. Dr. Iris Cumberbatch is a communications, marketing, corporate philanthropy, and government relations executive whose work centers on building bridges between organizations and their stakeholders. She currently is Senior Vice President, Head of Corporate Affairs at ECMC Group in Minneapolis, Minnesota, and previously served in executive leadership roles at the Federal Reserve Bank of Cleveland, Wells Fargo, Wachovia Bank, Bank of America, Citibank, and other financial and investment firms. Dr. Cumberbatch earned a PhD in leadership and change from Antioch University, an MBA from Queen's University of Charlotte, an advanced certificate in mass communication from the University of Manchester, United Kingdom, and a bachelor's degree in journalism and communication from Pennsylvania State University. Those are our panel members. That is our moderator. I will now go mute and just enjoy the service. Thank you, Dr. Iris Cumberbatch.
Thank you so much, Carolyn, for that introduction, and many thanks to our panel, Chief Bumpers, Chief Hawkins, Chief Harrison, for joining us this evening. We are looking forward to a very informative and engaging session. If you were fortunate enough to join us last month when the seasoned Sistahs had a conversation with our brothers in blue, you'll remember that we grounded the conversation in just some basic facts and figures about what we are talking about when we talk about policing in the United States. And so we'll repeat that introduction today. And so what is U.S. policing? Today, there are 17,985 police agencies in the United States, and that includes city police departments, county sheriff's offices, state police and highway patrol, and federal law enforcement agencies. In all, the United States has 800,000 sworn law enforcement officers serving in the country, which is the highest number we've ever had. Of those 800,000 law enforcement officers, 85% are male. That compares with just 49% male adults in the country's population. On the other hand, only 15% of those 800,000 sworn law enforcement officers are female. That compares with 51% adult females in the population. From a racial and ethnic demographic perspective, 66% of police are white, which is above the 60% of whites in the population. 13% of law enforcement are Black, exactly the same as the percentage in the general population. 12% are Hispanic, slightly below the 15% in the population. 2.5% are Asian, which is less than half the 5.6% Asian population in the country. On average, police officers are 39.5 years of age, pretty much in line with 38.5 average age in the population. And police earn slightly more than the general population at $69,000 compared to $65,000 in annual salary. So when we talk about policing in our communities, Black and brown communities, what exactly is the situation that we're facing today? Well, we know that in 2020, police killed 1,127 people, and that Black people were 28% of those killed by police, compared to being only 13% of the population. We know that 98.3% of killings by police from 2013 to 2020 did not result in officers being charged with a crime. We also know that Black men are at far greater risk of being killed by police, more than twice the risk relative to white men. And we know that it doesn't have to be this way. The United States far outstrips other countries in the number of fatal shootings by police. So with that background in mind, we're going to have a conversation today about policing and about what these three police chiefs see in our situation in the United States today. And so I'd like to start the conversation with the first question, which is, how are you all doing given the environment that you're living in right now? And I'll start off with Chief Bumpers. How are you doing?
Well, I am currently doing good. Of course, I am trying to manage my self-help and taking that time to ensure that I keep myself well mentally, physically, and spiritually. And I'd have to say that through all of this, I have definitely leaned more on my faith in God, spent more time really meditating and looking to God for guidance in all that I do. I always did it, but because of what we faced over the summer, the pandemic, all of the things that have come at us as leaders, trying to take care of others, I knew that I had to make sure that I had taken care of myself first. And not to mention, we all have families and lives outside of this uniform. So I'd have to say that currently I'm good, but definitely managing.
Thank you for that. And I think we are all coming through this pandemic and this season of social change, really having to focus on our self-care and taking care of ourselves mentally and physically and spiritually. So thank you for that. Chief Harrison, how are you doing?
Hi, Dr. Cumberbatch. Hello, everybody. I would say I'm doing better. As you know, 2020 was a very challenging year for everyone. We saw so many things that we hadn't seen before, from the pandemic and upticks in violent crimes, just so many different things, bail reform, restrictions on movement and everything. And I'll be honest with you, for a while, I wasn't doing well. I think as women tend to be natural nurturers. We also tend to be natural multitaskers. So I had a lot on my plate. And notice my use of the word was, because I've made some adjustments, but I was the type of person I wouldn't say no. I had a lot on my plate. I was caring for an elderly parent who had pneumonia, then contracted coronavirus. She was in a facility where I didn't see her for several weeks. And, no one cared that I was chief. I couldn't see my mom. Communication, which was in the beginning very frequent, started to not be as frequent. I would get text messages, please don't let me die here. And I had to make a decision to bring my mother home from that facility, all while working. I lost a detective, 45 years old, while this was happening. Sat out right outside my office, left behind a wife, left behind a 2-year-old and a 5-month-old. So I had to deal with that. And when you're the chief, people expect you to have the answers. They look to you for leadership. They look for you for calmness, and you can't show that vulnerability. So I struggled. I was a New York chapter president for the National Organization of Black Law Enforcement Executives. Then I took on an additional role on the national level. So I was multitasking and I was struggling. I put everybody first. I put myself last. Adult children, I have adult children, and you would think that they'd be okay. Okay, I struggle with my adult children. So I just had a lot of things that I was navigating. And what I've learned to do is say no. Sometimes you have to say no. And sometimes saying no is a hard no. Sometimes saying no is, you know what, not right now. This is not a good time. And I've had to learn how to be unapologetic about that and put more focus on myself. In the middle of this, I got a transfer and a promotion where work was more demanding. It had already been demanding, but work came more demanding of my time and the type of person that I am. I like to get out there and do things. So I had to really learn how to put myself first, put my health first, and take a step back and not be afraid to be vulnerable, but also not be afraid to be communicative. Because I know how I am a lot. I got it. I'm okay. I have it. I'm good. I wasn't good. And I was able to say, you know what, I'm struggling here, and was able to take a few steps back. So right now I'm doing better than I was doing. And I'm happy to say that.
Thank you for that very open and honest assessment of, not being okay. And, in many of the other sessions that we've had with Seasoned Sistahs, that's been a constant theme, that as Black women, we feel pressured to always show up as being okay, as being better than okay, of being so well that we are taking care of everybody else. So thank you for sharing that and for giving voice to what so many of us have felt through this time period. Chief Hawkins, how are you doing?
So first of all, excuse this train that's about to come in the background, but this is where my office is. Thank you, first of all, everyone. It's a blessing and honor, first of all, to be here with my lovely sisters. And thank you for that question. Just as the previous chiefs have shared, my initial response is typically, I'm good, I'm blessed, thank goodness. And I think we've been trained to have that. I apologize, you all. We've been trained to do that response because of the responsibilities that we've been given. But we also, along the way, it has been rough. And that is the true, honest reality that, one, I have to face for myself, because if the responsibility is for me to guide others, lead others, then I gotta let them be honest also. This last year, was I'm going to probably assume it's one of the most challenging years for us as a nation. We started off before COVID hit. If you think about it, we started off with the political divide. Then we got hit with COVID. Then we got hit with social civil unrest that is still going on. Then we got hit with some more the reality of this new enemy of COVID that you can't see, the fear, personal fear, as well as family fear, professional fear, and the unknown. It was a lot. So last year killed a lot of things, and it's not just people died. If you think about it, a lot of relationships probably died. A lot of reality had to hit of, I need to start prioritizing things. And one of those things, it did have to become me, but thank goodness I am strong in my faith, and I needed the prayer warriors that were around me the whole time period to remind me what was priority, and first focusing on why God has me in this position to take care of it, things to take care of the community, to take care of my family, and to be able to put things in perspective, because last year wasn't going to be the end. He was preparing all this for our future and trying to compartmentalize that and getting myself together in order. So I am definitely doing much better, but I think it's because I had to focus on God's purpose for myself and being able to start working on how to provide that for our profession, try to provide that leadership for my community and my friends. So I'm good though. I'm good. But I definitely thank you for that question. I think so often people look at us and think, oh, they have no problems. They have no issues, but have no idea our issues are double down, quadruple down, and always coming from all different directions. So thank you.
Absolutely. And thank you for sharing, that perspective. It's interesting how living through a pandemic and a once in a 50-year social unrest and a political disaster will focus your mind on needing to understand why you're here and what your purpose is, and how our faith in God really helps us uncover that, particularly in times of trouble. So thank you for that. So we're going to switch gears here and talk a little bit about how we'll continue the conversation around law enforcement from the perspective of our Black sisters in blue. And so we want to talk about 3 different areas. One is the culture of law enforcement, and that's going to internal issues, things like, what are the consequences for police misconduct, for excessive force, for racial bias? What kind of training should police have in things like de-escalation techniques? How do you implement best practices? So the first bucket we're going to look at is culture, internal issues. The second bucket is oversight and accountability. So what's the external controls in place over policing? Things like civilian and community oversight, or national databases of problem police, or repealing laws that protect police from being held accountable for their activities. So the second bucket is oversight and accountability. And then the third bucket we'll talk about is reinventing policing, and whether we need to reform the police, defund the police, disband or abolish the police, or do something else in order to arrive at the policing that we want. So let's start with the question of culture and internal issues. And the question first is, does police culture need to change? And if so, what are the top 1 or 2 issues related to the culture of policing that needs to change the most? This time I'll start with Chief Harrison. Does police culture need to change, and if so, how?
Well, in a word, I'm gonna say yes. Police culture needs to change. If you look at the history of policing, right? The history of policing started out as what? Slave catchers. That's where policing started out. It was rounding up slaves, keeping slaves in line. And, you know, we've come a long way, but we still have those type of cultures ingrained in our agencies. One of the things I think needs to change is collaboration, making sure that we're collaborating. One of the things I say when I speak to people is policing isn't something that should be done to you. Policing is something that should be done with you. Are we speaking with our partners? Are we just doing the same old thing? We can't keep policing in a silo, thinking that we know what we're doing and we don't need to change. We can't be rigid. We have to be fluid, and we have to leverage relationships, leverage partnerships. We have to just make sure that we're collaborative, but also make sure that we're communicative. I think there's so many instances where trust has been fractured. We have to get back to rebuilding trust. And I think a good first step is, again, being collaborative and being communicative.
That's a really powerful statement. Policing isn't something that should be done to you. It's something that should be done with you. And I think that if that were the case in our police departments, then that very central component of trust could be rebuilt pretty easily. So thank you for that. Chief Hawkins, does police culture need to change?
Yes, absolutely. Police culture needs to always continuously change because people change, society changes. So we have to not only keep up with society, but listen to the needs of our community consistently. I started over 31 years ago being told there's a structured way to do things that might have conflicted what I understood respect and fairness was. And unless we face our own selves, like the question you came up with saying, how are you doing? The image of law enforcement is we're invincible. The image is we can take on all this pressure and keep running like a warrior. When the reality is we're humans and we don't have to keep the secret that we're going through pain or we have crisis. Because if we're not healthy as individuals, how can we go help the community? So it has to change for us to face that reality of we're human with flaws, but if our character has a foundation to serve and we are ready to keep on learning, to keep on improving, becoming more innovative, then we'll always be changing. We'll always be changing to become better. So as definitely, should it change? It should always be changing, just like every profession. The more professional we become, the better we're able to serve our community.
Thank you. That's a really great observation that, you know, police are humans too, right? And they need to be healthy humans in order to be able to help our communities at all. So it's just a very good frame of reference to keep in mind. Thank you. Chief Bumpers.
Definitely the culture has to change. And I think it became apparent last summer when we saw all the trauma. And now in order to build trust from that trauma, it has to change. And I decided to come up with this acronym once that happened last summer. And I had to take a good look at our department, as every chief, I believe, did. Every leader just stopped to look at what was going on in their own house. And I said we had to aim. We had to adjust our aim. And we do that when we go to qualify yearly or biannually. But what I said for the A, we had to adjust to what was going on around us, as what we saw and how the community saw us. We had to make some adjustments. And then the I was, we had to be intentional. We had to be intentional about looking at the personnel we're bringing into our organization. Are we holding them accountable? And then we had to manage. We had to manage those emotions, because law enforcement is what I do. It's not who I am. I take this uniform off. So when I saw what happened to George Floyd, of course, it impacted me like it did everybody else. We're not superhuman. We want to see justice just like anyone else. And the one thing most cops dislike is a bad cop. So of course, we were all up in arms, hurt by what we saw. But it took us to look at that. It took the world to see law enforcement in a different light, and for us to see ourselves in a different light, to say this culture has to change. So I'm very hopeful. I still feel like this is a very noble profession, but I think it starts with the leadership. And I think that every organization has to stop and take aim and understand some things. I built the foundation for my department on the 3 C's, which is communication, collaboration, and cooperation. We're going to communicate with each other and outside with our community and with our law enforcement partners. We're going to collaborate with each other because it can be toxic inside when you take sides. And then we're going to cooperate. If we mess up, we're going to fess up. We're going to be transparent because we're about building bridges, changing trauma into triumph. And so I think it starts with the leadership.
Communication, collaboration, and cooperation. I think we can all agree that, if we could get that between our communities and our law enforcement agencies, it would be a huge improvement over what we have today. So thank you for that. So let's switch to our second question around oversight and accountability. And again, that's things like civilian community oversight or national databases of problem police. So does oversight and accountability of police need to change? And if so, what is the one change related to police oversight and accountability that would have the largest impact on improving policing? Chief Hawkins, I'll come to you first this time.
So the one change that I believe could have the biggest impact on accountability. I totally believe in accountability. I believe in making sure the people who put this uniform on are operating in the highest standard for, as if they stop me, I want to make sure you know the laws and you know what you're doing and you're going to treat me with respect no matter where you are. I think the biggest thing that can change is to create a national policy that is consistent with best practices. Right now, you mentioned that, over 17,000 agencies, over 80,000 officers across the board, and there is nothing national that says this is how we're going to operate consistently. So I know how my agency operates, the policies that we follow, the best practices, that the proactivity that we do to make sure we minimize harm, that we're respectful, and we still do our job with protecting the community. I know how my department operates. I know the law, but I have no idea how another agency will. There's so many different sizes of agencies. They're led by so many different type of leaders, so many different types throughout the nation, East Coast, West Coast, Mid Coast. The expectation of the community, until we establish a across the board policy to say, this is what's expected, no matter where you travel in our nation, that's what you can expect. Until that happens, that's going to have a problem. I also sit on the National Use of Force data collection. So where we want agencies to volunteer their use of force data, the benefit of that is to make sure we can start studying what's best practice, what is occurring in situations. We're having trouble trying to get agencies to volunteer this information, which is the community data. So making a national policy, I think, will have the biggest impact in accountability for what law enforcement does across the nation.
Yeah, that's a great point, and when you think about other professions, lawyers have national standards, doctors have national standards from the American Medical Association. So it's hard to believe that policing doesn't have national standards, and clearly we need them. Chief Bumpers, does oversight and accountability need to change?
I do believe it needs to change. And again, I think that it was exposed last summer. I am so proud of the work that Noble has done with around this issue. It started under Chief Davis, and then it has continued under our current president, Linda Williams. And we understand that we cannot do this individually as agencies. It has to be at a legislative level. And I think when you have organizations, law enforcement organizations outside of just a police agency that is advocating for change, and they understand the need for the change. So we cannot do this without some of the changes that are being advocated for now. I do believe that there needs to be a national database where officers are listed, so you cannot jump from one organization to the next and we know that you're a bad apple. And you know, I don't want to keep giving apples a bad name, so it could be a bad banana. Anything in the fruit bowl could be bad. So, but I think that we need those national databases, as Chief Hawkins mentioned, also for the use of force. But we just have to start somewhere, and I'm proud that Noble has started those conversations at a high level, and it's very supportive of our individual agencies.
Yeah, national database would be a huge improvement. And I do want to recognize and pay tribute to the Black law enforcement organizations, of which there are many around the country, and of which, you know, Noble is a really prime example of how you and your peers have coalesced to try to be the bridge between policing and our community. So thank you for that. Chief Harrison, oversight and accountability changes?
I definitely wholeheartedly believe there needs to be oversight and accountability. I echo what my two colleagues said before me about a national standard. I believe in that. But in terms of accountability, also, I think there's got to be peer accountability as well. We have to be able to hold each other accountable for our actions. We have to be able to intervene when we see something going wrong, and not being afraid to intervene, not being afraid of retaliation. We have to have some protections in place for, if you will, the whistleblowers that come forward, that intervene when things go wrong. But absolutely, I think there needs to be oversight. I think that I don't believe police agencies should police themselves. I think we need to be more transparent. I know my agency is certainly moving towards being transparent with respect to our disciplinary records, which are now easily accessible and available for members of the community to see who they're dealing with. So I think that we're heading in the right direction, but there's a lot more work still to be done.
Absolutely. And, you know, I live in Minneapolis, and the George Floyd murder was horrendous in and of itself. But next to that, I think the most horrendous thing was that lack of peer accountability, right? The fact that those other officers just stood there and did not intervene to save his life. So that peer accountability is a major, major need in law enforcement. Thank you for that. So our next topic is, so what do we do to reinvent policing? There are three terms that are being used, and they represent something different. So I'll explain each one a little bit. The first is reform. And by reform, as I understand it, is implementing techniques like body cameras and implicit bias training aimed at changing the behavior of the police that are currently on the job. The second is defund. And defunding is about reallocating funds that are currently targeted to police towards other community needs, like community services like mental health. So taking some of the money from policing and putting it towards other services that would hopefully minimize the need for police to be involved in certain situations. And then the third term is disband or abolish the police. And that goes to what a lot of people point to as the Camden example, where they dissolved the whole police force. Officers had to reapply for their positions. Community members applied too, and they sort of rebuilt the police force from the ground up. So the question is, do you believe policing needs to be reformed, defunded, or disbanded and rebuilt from scratch? Let's start with you, Chief Harrison.
I definitely think police departments need to be reformed. When I think of the word reform, I think of change. I think of transition. I think of enhancements. I think reform has to take places at a lot of different levels, from even starting with how we select candidates, how we recruit candidates, before we even hire them. Who are we looking at? What are our practices regarding how we hire candidates? How do we weed out the bad apples, not when they've got 10 years on, 20 years on, before we even hire them? What are those reforms looking like? I think reforms have to go from the bottom to the top at every level in between, from training, reforms in training, reforms in just more community engagement. I think, you know, especially when I speak about the New York City Police Department, right? We know how to arrest people. But what did that get us? That got us mass incarceration. That got us people that went to jail and came back, reoffended. How did we help these people? I think, you know, the reforms have to speak to how we give people help, how we give people hope, how we put people in contact with resources to make them more productive so that they don't reoffend. And I think that's where a lot of our reform efforts should really focus on.
Reforms to give people help and hope. That's a great goal. Chief Hawkins?
Yes, ma'am. So I'm gonna talk. You asked 3 different questions. I'm gonna start with the least favorable. So you said disband. No to the disbanding. I truly don't believe Camden was not really disbanded, because somebody had to provide policing services for that community. Disband. There's an expectation of policing in a community. Defund. No, because I do believe in funding going to the social entities for mental health, absolutely, but they did not come from the police agencies. They were taken away from our society, but it didn't take away, they weren't putting in funding law enforcement entities. Law enforcement just had to start training and become more educated and trying to deal with those situations. So definitely no to defunding, but definitely find funding for those sources to help the community. Reform to me. What reform to me definitely says yes, but it is not solely, for me, the responsibility of just the police department. Reform to me means an education of the community, because the community has to play a role, play a part, and talk about the systemic issues of as a whole. What do they want and what do they expect? They also have to get educated to what policing should be doing and what de-escalation truly is, and to figure out what type of training should be going to law enforcement. You know, we have 6 months minimum training. On top of that, that's just the basics. But then as we evolve and as we educate ourselves, I started when I was 21 years old. There's no way I knew how to deal with social work. So I had to learn it along the way. So the expectation of the community should understand, on top of basic education of law and constitution and how to do processing, there should come the community's input on how do we want to build protection of our community? How do we want to build engagement of the law enforcement? So reform to me does mean community engagement with policing, the expectations that they want. And that's what reform definitely means to me. They're empowered to have input, but just like law enforcement should be empowered to say, no, we have this profession, but we also, as everyone mentioned before, we're collaborating together to decide what does this reform look like for our community?
Thank you. The whole concept of collaboration with the community and really at the root, a much deeper civic engagement by all of us as community members, as residents, citizens, and police, really coming together to address all of those civics issues is a real thing. Chief Bumpers?
Yes, I think this goes back to our earlier question, Dr. Iris, when we talked about, do we need a culture change? So definitely, if we're talking about a change in culture, we're talking about reforming. And it's really strange to me that every city has their own word for this: reimagine, refund, reform. And you can tell we're all over the place. But for me, my read would be realign. We need to realign with our communities to build those bridges and to bring back community policing. We need the community and the community needs us. And then we need to reinvest. I think that we need to reinvest in social services. We need to reinvest in our children. The PAL program, which was a great program, but that was one of the programs, a lot of departments, that was the first thing they cut. But we have to reinvest in those community programs that build the bridges. And then I think we need to refund. If you want quality officers, you have to invest, and that takes money. So you cannot talk about taking money away from the police department, because when you look at budgets, the majority of a police department's budget is salaries. So it's very important that we refund. So I think in every community, hopefully we get on some national level where we're all on the same page and not all over the place, but come up with a document that says that some of these re's can be another type of realignment, reinvest, and refund. But I definitely think the overall reforming goes with that culture change.
Absolutely. Reform, realign, reinvest, and refund. A lot of re's for us to focus on when we think about what we need to do to get the policing that we want. So our last question is, if you could wipe the slate clean and establish the police force of your dreams, what would it look like and how would you describe it? Chief Hawkins, what's the police force of your dreams look like?
Woo-wee. Because this goes to the what if I had, very good question. So let me see. I would definitely have to start with trying to pick as a community first. I would have to choose the community that I want to be in. A community that's engaged, so that I can not only choose officers to hire and or employees to hire that are from the community, but I'd also have to choose people that from the surrounding community to make sure it is diverse, right? Then I would definitely put in place the best training, to have the best equipment, the best education, continued education, knowledge, to understand that we are problem solvers, building bridges and collaborating with the best technology, and with a good heart of service, that we're treating each other fairly inside, that we're always growing, and that we're always trying to be as innovative as possible for the future, to keep our community as safe as possible, and to give grace. So it's a idealistic, what I would love, and you think it's from the heart, but I've said this before. It comes from love. That's what I believe in, because love is the hardest thing to do. People think it's always gushy. It is not. Love is a verb. Love means that you take action. Love is a part of respect. Love is a part of patience. So it would come with that service of love which goes back to my purpose that I think I'm here. And as long as God's got me moving and going and shaking and making decisions, then I got a job to do. So that would be kind of cool to imagine and see how it would take place. Sorry if I went too long.
Oh, not at all. That's beautiful. An engaged community, diverse, well-trained, knowledgeable, bridge building, collaborating, using the right technology with a heart of service and grounded in love. That sounds pretty awesome. Chief Harrison, your dream police force.
Oh, my dream police force would be progressive. It would be community oriented. As Chief Hawkins said, the best training. I'd have robust campaigns to make sure we hired minorities, especially women. I think, I think it's widely known that women are, again, natural nurturers, but we're empathetic, we're compassionate. I'm drawn to, I know we've referred to George Floyd, that horrific situation. We've referred to it before, but before the knee was placed on his neck, he had expressed that he was claustrophobic and he didn't want to go in that vehicle. And he asked and he begged and he pleaded. And a lot of times you get these men and this machismo and it's what I say and we're rigid. It's what I think a woman there would have just done it differently. I know I certainly would have done it differently. So just a robust effort to just ensure that we're definitely hiring minorities, but we're hiring women. I know you gave your statistics before, and when we look at the statistics on women and minorities, they're just not high enough and they're not representative of the communities. I know I mentioned already community oriented. Again, we've got to be lockstep with our partners and we have to be able to see the community as our partner and see the community as our ally. We're in these communities, we're policing these communities, and we think we know it all. Well, we don't. We need to ask the community, what do you want? What do you think? So we'd be communicative, we'd be transparent. Again, I already said the best training so that our cops have the resources and the tools to be able to do their job. It's not always about arresting people. It's about helping people. It's about connecting people to resources and understanding that. So I think that's what my ideal police department would look like.
Progressive, community oriented with minorities and women, empathetic, compassionate, community oriented, and transparent with the goal of helping people. That sounds awesome. Chief Bumpers, you have the last word here. Your dream police department.
My dream police department would probably look similar to Noah's Ark. We have a little bit of everything, reflective of the communities that we serve. I would want those personnel that were part of the agency to be servant leaders. I would want them to see themselves as servant leaders and understand that we're all important. As I say, we're all VIPs. There's no little I's or big U's. We're all important. And I would want them to see that and be invested in the agency and understand you represent this badge and this patch. If one person messes up, it makes all of us look bad. So we're going to hold each other accountable and make sure that we produce the best, that we're quality. And so I just would want us to understand that in dealing with our communities, we're going to respect everybody, whether we're taking them to jail or we're just giving them a ride home. Everybody deserves to be respected and treated right, no matter what. And that 20-year, 30-year officer who decides to stay there, it's not about why they started, it's why they stay. And that why has to still be as important as the day you had the badge pinned on you. Once you understand that why, I think we can have a very productive department, a committed department, because so many people after they've been in this business a while, they forget their why. And I think that is why you see them cross the line. But I would want that department, those servant leaders, to never forget the why I stay and because I've been called for a purpose. And when you understand that, you're committed to it and you hold others accountable.
Noah's Ark, a little bit of everything, made up of servant leaders who see everyone as important and who respect every person, treats everyone right, and never forgets why they're there. I think that's a great, great sentiment for us to end on. Chief Hawkins, Chief Harrison, Chief Bumpers, thank you so much. It's been a wonderful and enlightening conversation. Thank you for your service. Thank you for your leadership. And thank you for your sisterhood. All these things matter, and I appreciate each and every one of you. And with that, I'll turn it back over to Carolyn Williams.
Well, thank you. I think we have like 6 minutes left, and I love the fact that we have 6 minutes left. So any one of you can answer this question that was in the chat. What tools, resources do your department have in place to address mental health issues that affect officers, like suicide and those kinds of things? Do any of you have anything in place to address that? If you do, any one of you can speak. If you don't, just say we don't.
Well, I'm just starting to get my peer support group off the ground. I have identified those persons who will be a part in the department, officers who will be a part of this peer support group. And of course, we consistently allow them to utilize well days, and I encourage that. Take your time off. I think, again, it starts with the leadership and those supervisors encouraging. And I push the supervisors to pay attention to your people, because we can all get to that point where we're just not paying attention to our own bodies and how we're feeling. But if a supervisor sees somebody who has started to act differently, I encourage them to talk to the person. You don't have to tell me your business, but let me give you some resources, whether it be EAP, a counselor, or talking to someone who you trust. So that is, right now, is what we're doing in my department.
So I'll share a little bit, only because I'm a little bit proud of it. It's been very much a focus to understand the needs, even for myself. You know, years ago, I probably was so stressed out, I had to be admitted because I kept going and going. But for my agency, we, two different things. We applied for a grant for a psychiatrist, and we tied the grant to saying wellness. So it's an overall grant that we just got approved for. We were able to hire a dedicated psychiatrist for that. But on top of that, my council approved funding for us to have another psychologist. So we're in the process of finishing up the bid process. We've chosen one. So we're going through contract, and we can't get it quick enough just to give them an outlet outside of a fitness for duty and outside of EAP. This is solely you go, you talk, do what you want to do, and then that gives them resources to get help. And we have a couple wellness room. We also within the department, as well as peer support. So very important.
All right.
We also
Well,
have,
thank you. Go ahead. I'm sorry. Chief
that's
Harris?
okay. Oh, I was just going to say, we also have peer support. We have early intervention. We have employee relations. We have a partnership with Columbia Presbyterian where people can call and get seen and speak to psychiatrists. One of the things I did in my previous assignment, I had worked in special victims. And in special victims, we were dealing with sexual assaults and child abuse only. So we were truly seeing the worst of the worst. I got the funding to hire an outside vendor to come in and speak to everyone, because we saw a rise in suicides, but I was also additionally concerned about vicarious trauma. So I was able to bring an outside vendor in, and my whole special victims division, including my civilian employees and including my advocates from Safe Horizon, was trained.
Right. So thank you all for that. And I just want to remind everyone that we could have all the mental health professional help in the world. It's not like you can just grab an officer and take them in handcuffs and put them in the room and make them talk. right? So there are, if we had a cure for preventing suicide, then our suicide rate wouldn't be as high as it is around the United States in every profession. So again, we have to make sure that we're paying attention to the employees, looking for the signs and the symptoms. And you also have to have people communicating to you that they're worried about their fellow officers. So with that, I'm gonna say, thank you for another fabulous Seasoned Sisters session. Thank you to our panelists. You know, I love you all. I don't even have to tell you that. You all are fabulous. Thank you for our tech folk behind the scenes doing their thing again tonight, Miss Deanna. Thank you, Dr. Foxy Doxy, Dr. Iris Cumberbatch, for you're just great. I've gotten more messages that, you know, your moderator is great. She needs to be on television. She needs to be doing this on national news. So you all have done a fabulous job. This is, again, a wonderful conversation that we have. I wanted to share with our audience that we now have a YouTube channel. Yes, sponsored by Dr. Iris Cumberbatch. We have a YouTube channel that Deanna Wilkins is managing for us, and the name, in order to be able to find us or to link yourself to that channel or subscribe to that channel, all you have to type in YouTube is Seasoned Sisters Speak, right? And we've already put our first one in. We put the Black Brothers in Blue in there, and we'll be adding our Black Sisters in Blue to that YouTube channel as well. So again, thank you all. Deanna, you can take everybody off mute. Is everybody off mute, or are you working on it? Deanna, you're
I
trying to
am
figure
working
it
on
out?
it. Everyone is now able to take themselves off mute.
All right, well, thank you all. Everybody okay? Have a good evening. Love y'all.
Thank you.
Good night.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.
See you all. Love you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for the
Vice
opportunity.
President Tiffany Tim for joining.
Thank you.
All right. Well, our
Thank
panelists still,
us.
if our panelists will still remain.
Thanks for the reminder, Carolyn.
Good night, everyone. Sis.
Hi, Carolyn Lewis.
Lynn.
Hello,
I miss your
Hey,
face. I
cousin
love you
Denise.
all.
Miss you.
Yeah.
Look,
Y'all have a good
you know
evening.
you all should have kept me on mute. I was so glad somebody said something about that suicide. I'm from a police family and they've been through some changes and lately it's rough.
Yeah.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah,
Good night.
Good night.
And thank you all for your service.
Thank
Thank
you.
you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Deanna, can you start recording, please?
Yes, ma'am.
Yeah, because we have to cut all